Welcome to Lamenting Souls of the Past. If you are new here, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss any of our stories. We would also love to know which country or city you are watching from, and which moment in history you would like us to explore next. If you have not yet joined our community, please consider joining, because many powerful and unheard stories that never reached the public have been shared there. Now let us begin our story. While Master Cornelius Blackwood and his guests gathered inside the main hall of Willow Plantation, enjoying Kentucky bourbon and Cuban cigars, celebrating the purchase of 50 more enslaved workers and speaking proudly about record cotton profits for the year 1857, no one noticed a 38-year-old woman moving quietly through the pine woods surrounding the estate. She moved with calm purpose, unlocking 6 reinforced wooden cages she had carefully constructed over the past 8 months. Her name was Maneuver Hole, enslaved for 22 years, officially listed in plantation records as an animal keeper and pest hunter, a title that concealed her true ability, the rare skill of calming and guiding wild predators. She was the daughter of a captured Igbo priestess who had shared ancestral knowledge about the ways of great cats. Maneuver carried a gift that white men never understood, the ability to connect with panthers, cougars, and lynxes through sound, movement, and deep spiritual awareness. For many years she kept this knowledge hidden, watching closely, learning silently, and waiting patiently. That patience ended in February of 1857 when her young daughter was harmed by Master Blackwood and later sold away to avoid scandal on the plantation. That night, something ancient and unbreakable stirred inside Maneuver's heart. She did not plan to flee. She planned to bring an end to the suffering around her. Over 8 long months, she carefully captured 6 wildcats from the deep forests of Georgia, 2 black panthers, 3 young cougars, and 1 full-grown lynx. She fed them, cared for them, and trained them with endless patience and focus. On the night of October 22nd, 1857, while 6 white men laughed and drank inside the plantation, Maneuver Hole opened the cages and whispered a single command in her mother's ancient language. What followed turned her into the most feared and legendary figure in Georgia's history of slavery, known as the Panther Queen, the woman who proved that even the wildest creatures would follow an enslaved black woman before submitting to those who claimed power over her. But this story truly began months earlier, when Maneuver Hole was still seen as just another enslaved woman struggling to survive in Burke County, Georgia. At the heart of the plantation belt that made white men wealthy and turned black people into property, Willow Plantation stretched across 2,300 acres of rich Georgia land, located 20 miles west of Augusta. The land had belonged to the Blackwood family since 1798, passed down through 3 generations who built their wealth through cotton production and forced labor. By 1857, the plantation held 143 enslaved people, making Cornelius Blackwood one of the richest men in the county. The big house stood 3 stories tall, its white columns shining in the Georgia sun, surrounded by magnolia trees and carefully kept lawns maintained daily by enslaved workers, even during dry seasons. Behind the appearance of Southern elegance lived a system of control and cruelty beyond imagination. The plantation operated like a small kingdom with a strict order. At the top sat Master Cornelius Blackwood, 47 years old, a man whose education and travels never changed his belief in racial superiority. He defended slavery using religious and philosophical arguments, quote, scholars and ministers who claimed it was part of divine order. Cornelius believed control was strongest when it appeared organized. He kept written records of punishments, convinced that documentation made the system appear proper. His ledger listed hundreds of disciplinary actions, each carefully recorded. He was tall, well-dressed, and owned a large library that enslaved people were forbidden to touch. His wife, Mistress Elalina Blackwood, came from an old Savannah family and presented herself as a refined Southern lady. In private, she was known for emotional cruelty, separating family as punishment and enforcing strict control over household workers. She took special interest in monitoring young enslaved women whom she viewed with suspicion and jealousy. Her actions left lasting emotional scars throughout the plantation. The overseer, Silas Crow, was a harsh and watchful man who enforced rules with constant pressure and fear. He walked the fields daily, watching for any sign of weakness or rest. Below him were 2 drivers, enslaved men placed in positions of authority over others, forced to choose survival over solidarity. One was Josiah, who believed strict control would protect his fragile status. The other was Marcus, a younger man clinging to promises that were never meant to be fulfilled. The plantation doctor, Ambrose Whitfield, visited regularly to care for the white family and to conduct questionable medical practice on enslaved people, believing harmful theories common at the time. His actions caused lasting pain and fear among those forced into his care. This was the world Minerva Hall endured for 22 years. Yet before understanding what she would become, one must understand who she was before slavery tried to erase her. Minerva was not born enslaved. She arrived in America at 16 years old in 1835 aboard a slave ship from Calabar. Her African name was Em, meaning peace in her native language. Her mother, Adiaha, was a respected spiritual leader who taught her daughter how to read nature, understand animals, and move through the forest with awareness and respect. She also passed down ancient traditions centered on balance, discipline, and harmony with powerful animals. Em learned by watching her mother interact with leopards near their village. She understood their sounds, movements, and signals. By her early teens, she could call them without fear. To them, she was not prey or threat, but family. When traders arrived, her village was destroyed. Many lives were lost, and survivors were forced on a long march to the coast. The journey and sea crossing were filled with hardship, loss, and grief. Em survived by retreating into memory, holding onto her mother's teachings and quiet prayers. She arrived in Charleston in late 1835 and was sold at auction. A trader renamed her Minerva, believing it sounded more acceptable. She spent months in confinement, forced to learn obedience and language through harsh treatment. She survived by becoming silent and patient, burying her knowledge deep inside. In March of 1836, Cornelius Blackwood purchased her at auction, impressed by her strength and endurance, unaware that the quiet woman he bought carried a power he would never understand. Though out any pause, he sent her to Willow Plantation and put her to work in the fields, picking cotton from sunrise to sunset. The work was exhausting and painful, often leaving bodies broken at a young age. But Minerva endured. Strength ran in her blood, a power that slavery could never erase. For 22 years she survived. She worked under the blazing Georgia sun, her hands raw and aching. She lived through hunger, punishment, and humiliation. When she was 21, she was forced into harsh labor with a man named Thomas, the master's way of controlling the lives of enslaved people. She had 4 children. The first, Joseph, was sold at age 8 to a distant plantation. She held him as he cried, knowing she would never see him again. The second, Grace, died from illness because medicine was denied to enslaved children. The third, Samuel, was lost when an untreated injury became infected. The fourth, Patience, born in 1843, was her only remaining light. Patience grew beautiful with her mother's strong features and her grandmother's wise eyes. She was gentle, kind, and always singing soft songs while working in the big house. Minerva quietly taught her the old ways, how to read the stars, identify edible plants, recognize danger, and survive. Minerva had long abandoned the hope of freedom. She lived only to keep Patience safe. After long days of work, she would sneak into the kitchen where her daughter slept and teach her songs and prayers from their old language. Keeping Patience alive was all she dreamed of, all she hoped for. Then came the night of February 14th, 1857. Master Blackwood was alone in the big house, drinking heavily. What happened that night changed everything. Minerva, working in the kitchen, heard the distress in her daughter's voice and the struggle next door. She could not intervene directly without risking both their lives, so she stayed hidden, trembling, powerless. When the door opened and Patience stumbled into the kitchen, bruised and terrified, Minerva caught her. She whispered protective prayers and comforted her child. For weeks afterward, Patience was silent, moving like a ghost through her tasks. Minerva watched her with grief so deep it felt physical. In a world of slavery, there was no justice, no protection. She could only wait and care. By March, it became clear that Patience's life had been permanently altered. A slave trader came to the plantation intending to take her away. Minerva ran forward, clutching her daughter, fighting with all her strength. Despite the blows and threats, she refused to let go. She was wounded, but she refused to stop. Eventually, Patience was taken, and Minerva was left alone in the dirt, bleeding, and watching her daughter disappear into a world of unknown suffering. In that moment, something inside her changed. She became something more than a mother in pain. She became unstoppable, a force driven by the need to protect and survive. 3 days later, Minerva walked into the Georgia wilderness to hunt and survive. The forests were vast, untamed, and full of danger, but she had knowledge passed down through generations. She asked permission from the master to hunt small game and protect crops. He agreed, thinking he could control her grief. He had no idea he had given her the tools she needed to reclaim her power. For the first month, she hunted as she was supposed to, but something new had awakened in her, a determination and skill that could not be broken. She brought home rabbits, possums, and sometimes a deer. She relearned the forest, slowly reconnecting with the habits of wild creatures. At night, she walked farther than anyone else would dare, following signs only she could understand. She listened closely to the sounds of darkness, telling one animal from another, learning the language of hunting, and she began to remember who she truly was before they renamed her and bound her in chains. In the 4th week of April, she discovered the first panther. It was a young male, maybe 3 years old, thin and starving after a brutal winter. Minerva followed him for 3 days, studying his movements and learning the borders of his land. Then she set a trap, not a cruel steel device that crushed bones, but something far more careful. She killed a deer, cleaned it, and placed the body in an open clearing. Then she climbed into a tree and waited when the panther arrived at dusk to feed. Minerva began to sing, not in English, and not in any language white men would know. She sang in the ancient tongue her mother had taught her, sounds that meant you seen, you are honored, you belong. The panther froze with meat still in his mouth, ears turning toward the sound. Minerva kept singing, her pitch steady, letting the notes flow through her throat in patterns that copied the big cat's own calls. Slowly and carefully she climbed down from the tree without stopping the song. The panther watched her closely, tail flicking, muscles tight and ready to run or strike, but Minerva knew the exact moment to lower her tone and add the deep rumble that said, I am not prey, I am family. She moved smoothly, not with the stiff fear of humans, but with the calm certainty of another hunter. She knelt 10 feet away, still singing, and pressed her hand flat against the earth. The panther stared at her for a long, silent minute. Then, unbelievably, he lowered his head and stepped forward. He smelled her hand, licked her palm once with his rough tongue, then rubbed his huge head against her shoulder, marking her with his scent and accepting her into his world. Minerva cried then, for the first time since they took patience. She held that wild creature and felt a connection to something clean, free, and dangerous. The panther stayed for an hour before slipping back into the forest, but he would come again, because Minerva had reached something older than training or taming. She had spoken to the ancient agreement between her people and the great cats, a bond older than civilization itself. Over the next 2 months she found 5 more. 2 Panthers, a bonded pair living deep in the Savannah River swamps. 3 young cougars, siblings hunting the pine barrens north of the plantation. And 1 powerful lynx, scarred from many fights, with sharp eyes that seemed to fully understand what Minerva was asking. Each animal she approached using the old ways. Each one she drew into her circle through song, scent, and the quiet force that links hunter to hunter. At first she did not cage them. She built trust instead, visiting every day, bringing food, singing, strengthening the bond. She learned who they were. The lead panther was fierce and territorial, ideal for close fighting. The panther pair hunted together like one body. The cougars were young and eager, quick to follow and hungry to please. The lynx was ruthless and calm, patient and deadly. By June, she had fully earned their trust. That was when the true training began. Minerva built cages deep in the forest, 3 miles from the plantation, hidden in a ravine, thick with brush and shaded by a canopy so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground. These were not prisons but training spaces, wide enough for movement and strong enough to hold them when needed. She lined them with soft pine needles and brought fresh water from a nearby spring. She wanted comfort, not fear. This was cooperation, not bondage. The training was detailed and demanding. First, she taught them to react to certain sounds. A low whistle meant gather. A sharp click meant hunt. A long drawn-out tone meant stay still. She practiced during feeding, rewarding quick obedience with fresh meat. The cats were smart and driven by hunger, and they learned fast. Second, she trained them to accept cages without panic. At first, the doors stayed open. Food was placed inside, letting them come and go freely. Weeks later, she began closing the doors for short moments, always staying close and singing softly to calm them. The third step was the hardest. She had to teach them to attack certain people and ignore others. She made scarecrows dressed in clothes stolen bit by bit from the big house, Blackwood's shirts, Silas Crow's trousers, Eleanor's dresses. She soaked the fabric with real human scent, gathered secretly over months. Sweat from collars, blood from cuffs. The cats learned to link those smells to the attack command, To make sure they did not harm slaves, she collected clothing from the quarters and surrounded the scarecrows with those scents. The cats were trained to know the difference between destroy this and protect this. It took 3 months of daily effort. By September, they could tell targets apart with frightening accuracy. She tested them with a living trial. She caught a wild boar, dressed it in a shirt taken from Josiah the driver, and released it into a clearing with 3 cougars. She gave the command. They killed the boar in 12 seconds, striking the throat together. Then she released a goat wearing a shirt from the slave quarters and gave the same signal. The cougars circled but did not attack, gently driving it back toward maneuver. It was perfect. The final preparation was mental, and it was the darkest part of her work. In the weeks before the planned attack, she fed the cats less, keeping them hungry but strong. She also introduced them to human blood, small amounts mixed with meat, increasing slowly until the smell meant food. From her mother's teachings, she knew that once cats tasted human blood, they were far more willing to see humans as prey. This is what should disturb you most. Minerva was not acting in wild anger or madness. She was planning careful, exact murder over 8 months of steady work. She was turning nature itself into a weapon against those who had stolen everything from her, and she did it with calm focus, like someone who had finally found her reason to live. During all this, life at Willamere appeared unchanged. Minerva worked the fields, kept her eyes low, and played the role of the broken woman grieving her child. She looked defeated. Master Blackwood even pointed her out at dinner parties as proof of successful control. That woman lost her child, he would say, and still works without complaint. That is how a slave should be. No one guessed what she did in the woods each evening. No one questioned the scratches on her arms, assuming they came from thorns. No one listened closely when she hummed spiritual songs with strange rhythms while working. Those songs were practice for the calls she would used to guide the cats during the attack. Silas Crow noticed she vanished into the forest most evenings, but he assumed she was trapping animals or meeting a man. Sometimes he thought about following her to punish the absence, but she always returned before curfew with rabbits or useful news about pests, so he ignored it. That choice would cost him his life. By early October, everything was set. The 6 cats answered her commands without hesitation. They were hungry, violent, and fixed on their targets. The cages sat within half a mile of the big house, close enough for speed, far enough to stay hidden. Minerva planned every step, the paths through the trees, the release points, the order of deaths, and backup plans for failure. Only one thing remained: the date. She chose October 22nd for many reasons. It was the night of a new moon, offering deep darkness. Master Blackwood was hosting guests, gathering the men she hated most in one place. The cotton harvest was nearly finished, leaving field hands exhausted and unlikely to investigate noise. And October 22nd marked exactly 8 months since they took patience, a sacred number. In old traditions, the guests would be Dr. Ambrose Whitfield, Silas Crow, Thurston Caldwell, who had worked 2 of her friends to death, slave trader Marcus Grimshaw, who broke family apart, Josiah the driver who betrayed his own people, and Cornelius Blackwood himself. 6 men, 6 cats. Balance. Eleanor Blackwood would be away visiting her sister in Milledgeville. Minerva had planned that too, not to spare Eleanor, but because Eleanor's punishment would come later. Tonight was for the men who had directly destroyed Patience and so many others. On the morning of October 22nd, Minerva rose before sunrise and performed the ritual her mother had taught her. She bathed in the creek, washing away soap and human scent, replacing it with pine needles, river mud, and crushed herbs to blend with the forest. She fasted all day, sharpening her thoughts. She worked the fields without emotion, saving her strength, replaying every step in her mind. Step by step, the night drew closer. As the sun sank low, she felt an unusual calm. There was no fear, no doubt, no hesitation. She had fully become what she was meant to be, an instrument of justice that slavery had tried but failed to destroy. If anyone wonders whether this is madness or righteousness, think about living in a world where the law shields your abuser, the state sells your children, and the church blesses your chains. In such a world, what does sanity mean? What does justice look like? At 7 in the evening, guests began arriving at the big house. Minerva watched quietly from the vegetable garden, memorizing their positions, counting faces, noticing every detail. Blackwood welcomed them on the porch with bourbon and cigars, their laughter carried across the plantation. Inside, the dining table was set for 6. The cook had prepared roast venison, cornbread, collard greens, and sweet potato pie. The masters would feast like kings while the enslaved lived on meager fare. At 8 o'clock, Maneuver reported to the overseer's cabin, showing the day's trapped animals, 3 rabbits, and a possum. Silas waved her away with a grunt. Already drunk and eager to return to the party, she walked back toward the quarters, waited for full darkness at 8:30, then melted silently into the forest. The walk to the cages took 35 minutes. Maneuver moved like a shadow, avoiding paths, guided by memory and instinct. The forest was alive with night sounds, crickets, frogs, and the distant hoot of an owl. She added a low hum of her own, a signal to the cats that she had arrived. When she reached the cages, all 6 animals were awake, alert, and sensing that tonight was different. The lead panther paced with restless energy. The mated pair pressed against their bars, watching her with glowing eyes. The young cougars played roughly, and the lynx sat perfectly still, patient and deadly. Maneuver moved between the cages, speaking to each cat in the old language, preparing M. She marked herself with scent she had gathered, Blackwood's cologne on her wrist, Silas Crow's tobacco-stained bandana on her arm, Dr. Whitfield's medicine bag on her shoulder. The cats understood. Everything was a target except this scent. At 9:15, distant laughter drifted from the big house. The dinner party was in full swing. It was time. She opened the first cage. The lead panther stepped out smoothly, followed by the mated pair, then the cougars, then the lynx. 6 powerful cats formed a circle around her, awaiting her command. She lifted her face to the night sky and sang it, the old tongue, a sound that called the cats to hunt together, a signal that those who had wronged them would face justice. The cats answered with low growls, rolling through the forest like distant thunder. Maneuver led her silent army toward the big house. They moved like shadows through the trees, carefully keeping to the undergrowth, soundless except for the occasional snap of a twig. The distance to the house was long and dangerous. One glimpse from a window and the plan would fail. But it was late, the moonless night hiding them. Field hands were locked in their quarters, exhausted. The house slaves had retreated to the kitchen. Only the 6 men in Blackwood's study remained awake, drinking and laughing about profits and human property. At the forest's edge, Maneuver could see the house clearly, windows glowing, shadows moving. The cats pressed close to her, muscles tense with anticipation. She needed them ready, but not exhausted. So she did something daring. She walked openly toward the house, appearing just as a lone slave woman approaching. While the 6 predators followed perfectly in her show, she reached the wall and pressed herself against it. Through the study window she could hear everything. The men spoke freely, joking and boasting about their cruelty. Every word fueled the fire within her. This was the moment her last trace of mercy vanished. She gave a simple, old command to the cats: attack. What happened next was swift and decisive, the kind of justice that reshaped the balance of power in the house. The cats moved with speed, precision, and terrifying coordination. The men who had believed themselves untouchable were thrown into panic and fear. Chaos filled the study. No graphic gore is needed to understand the power and terror unleashed. In the end, Maneuver and her companions controlled the room, the predators enforcing justice with lethal efficiency, leaving the tyrants stripped of their arrogance. Outside, the forest absorbed the sound of movement, and the night returned to silence, heavy with the memory of what had passed. Whispering prayers to a god who had never seemed to protect her people, Maneuver steadied herself. The air in the study was thick with tension, a silence broken only by her own heartbeat. One of the trained cougars stepped forward, moving with the slow, deliberate grace of a hunter who knows the prey is trapped. It paused in front of the desk, tail flicking in the air, sensing the fear radiating from the man inside. Then it leapt onto the desk in one fluid motion, muscles coiled and precise. It peered down at Josiah from above. "Please," Josiah whispered, voice shaking. "Please, I'm one of you. I'm enslaved too. Please." The cougar did not respond to pleas or logic. It had been trained for a specific purpose, and Josiah's presence fit that purpose perfectly. It moved decisively, dragging him out of hiding with a strength and precision that left no room for resistance. Josiah tried to struggle, but it was futile. The predator simply watched, measured, and acted with absolute certainty, leaving him utterly at the mercy of forces beyond his control. That left Cornelius Blackwood, master of Willower Plantation, a man who believed himself untouchable, a man who thought intellect and privilege could shield him from consequences. He stood pressed against the far wall of the study, aware now that every illusion of control he had clung to for decades was gone. The room was a tableau of chaos, bodies scattered, the air thick with the scent of fear and exertion. The expensive furniture bore marks of struggle. The walls bore witness to a moment where centuries of oppression had been overturned in an instant. Blackwood tried to speak, but his words faltered, swallowed by the gravity of what he faced. The cats did not rush him. They formed a semicircle, cutting off escape, waiting patiently for the command from their leader. They were intelligent, disciplined, and fully aware of the moment at hand. Through the broken window came Minerva. She moved with a haunting grace, stepping carefully over obstacles, her presence commanding and calm. The cats acknowledged her with low rumbling purrs, but did not bray. K-formation. She walked into the center, standing face to face with Cornelius Blackwood. Their eyes met master and the wronged, the oppressor and the one who had been denied justice for too long. "Do you remember my daughter's name?" she asked, calm, precise. Blackwood's lips moved, barely forming a sound. "Patience," he whispered at last. "And do you remember what you did to her?" He swallowed, looking around at the room, the tension, the presence of the predators. Words failed him. "She was my child," Minerva said, "and you destroyed her life. You cannot undo this. You cannot bargain. You do not own this moment. This is mine, and this is for patience." She stepped back, and from her chest came a sound, a low, resonant note that rose and filled the room. It was a signal, a call to the predators who had been trained to respond. They sprang into action, moving with speed and precision, a blur of motion that left Blackwood paralyzed, stripped of all certainty. They circled, engaged, and restrained him without allowing for escape. In moments he was under control, powerless against forces that respected neither wealth nor privilege. Minerva watched calmly, eyes steady, as justice unfolded. The predators did not act out of cruelty, but instruments of accountability, ensuring that no one could walk away from the harm they had caused. When the task was complete, she called them back. They obeyed, returning to her side, rubbing against her legs, marking the moment with our presence. She touched each one, murmuring words of gratitude and respect. In minutes, the study had been transformed. 6 men were incapacitated, unable to threaten anyone further. Justice had been served without reckless indulgence, swift, precise, and primal. Minerva felt satisfaction, though she knew this could never undo all the losses, the years of pain, the lives stolen. But this was something she could claim: agency, power, choice. For the first time in decades, she had acted for herself and shaped reality to match her will. Outside, chaos was rising. Voices shouted, feet ran, and the illusion of control shattered for anyone who might intervene. Minerva moved quickly, gathering the items she needed from Blackwood's desk record, documents, anything that would preserve evidence and prevent further harm. She packed them into a satchel and retrieved treasures from the safe: gold, cash, records, ownership. Every item she claimed was a tool for freedom, for memory, for justice. The 6 predators had done their work. They were tired, full of exertion, but still loyal. Minerva spoke to them, letting them return to the wild, free to live on their own terms, carrying with them the memory of the moment they had served as instruments of balance and reckoning. One by one, they vanished into the forest. Minerva was alone, standing among the evidence of her power and the quiet of the aftermath. She listened to the approaching footsteps and shouts, giving herself just enough time to escape. She moved to the window, stared at the indifferent stars, and thought of all she could not save: the loved ones, the lost children, the mother, the years of stolen life, but also of what she could claim: this moment, this act, this triumph. The door burst open. 3 men from a neighboring property entered, frozen at the scene before them, bloodied, chaotic, and yet in the center, a black woman stood calm and unshaken, holding her satchel. "What have you done?" one whispered. Minerva smiled. A smile of quiet strength, of a world reshaped by her hands. "Justice," she said simply. Then she moved, leaping from the window, rolling safely, and disappearing into the forest. Behind her, shouts rose, but she had what mattered: knowledge, speed, and the night itself on her side. She ran through the forest for hours, a woman transformed. Every familiar path, every hidden waterway, every cover of darkness was her ally. She had no weapons, no allies, no guarantees, but she had freedom. When she reached the Savannah River, she dove in, letting the current carry her away from the plantation, away from chains, and into a night that she would own forever. This would break her scent trail and throw the dogs off. On the far side, she guided herself by the North Star and moved toward Augusta, not to go into the city, which would mean certain death, but to circle around it and keep heading north. She carried $2,300 in cash, papers proving Patience's sale, and deep knowledge of Savannah's red light district. She would find her daughter, she would free her, and then they would run together toward whatever freedom could mean in a land where bondage was lawful. But first, there was one more place she had to go. Elenina Blackwood was still alive, visiting her sister in Milledgeville, unaware that she was now a widow, and Minerva's sense of justice was not yet finished. That part of the story would happen 3 days later, when Eleanor returned home to find her husband dead and her house servant gone. When she learned what Minerva had done, she would collapse in shock, and when she woke up, she would see Minerva standing over her bed with a knife, ready to complete what the cats had begun. But for now, as morning broke over Georgia on October 23rd, Minerva Hall was free, truly free for the first time in 22 years. She walked north through the woods, guided by stars and instinct, while behind her the plantation world she had destroyed struggled to understand a massacre that would haunt them for generations. The immediate result was confusion and terror. When the sun rose on October 23rd, Wilhelmia Plantation looked like a war zone. The sheriff came from Augusta with 20 armed men. Inside the study they found 6 bodies, ripped apart so badly that they could only be identified by personal items. Nothing about the scene made sense. What kind of animal could do this? Why were there no tracks except bloody paw prints that led to a window and then vanished? And where was the enslaved woman everyone believed had to be responsible? The sheriff studied the slaughter closely. He had seen violence before, drunken fights, knife wounds, even killings, but nothing like this. The bodies showed signs of attack by several large predators. But how could wildcats get into a locked room, kill 6 men, and escape without being shot or stopped? It made no sense. Unless, someone murmured, the cats had been guided, controlled, turned into weapons by someone with forbidden knowledge, maybe a conjure woman. The older slaves would understand such things. The sheriff brushed this off as foolish superstition. Still, fear had taken root. If an enslaved woman could do this, what did that say about the order white people claimed to control? What did it reveal about who truly held power? They found Minerva's sleeping place in the quarters empty, her few belongings gone. 3 days later, after an intense search, they discovered the cages in the forest. They were empty but showed clear signs of long use. Cat hair, claw marks, dried blood. The cages were carefully built, showing planning and intelligence. The meaning was frightening. News spread through Burke County fast. An enslaved woman had trained wildcats to kill her master and 5 other white men. She had escaped and was somewhere in the wild, possibly still commanding deadly animals. Panic gripped the area. Plantation owners slept with loaded guns. Some sold their slaves at once, no longer trusting any black person. Others imposed harsh new rules, extra locks on quarters, armed guards at night, strict checks on movement. The governor of Georgia announced a reward of $1,000 for Minerva Hall, dead or alive. Wanted notices appeared across the state, though the description was vague. Black woman, in her 30s, average height, known as Minerva. It meant nothing. Thousands fit that description. Among the enslaved people of Burke County, something strange happened. They could not speak openly and never would. But in quiet whispers after dark, Minerva became more than human. She became a legend. She became hope. If one woman could strike back so completely, so fiercely, what else might be possible? The story changed with each retelling. Some said she controlled wildcats. Some claimed she turned into a panther herself. Others swore bullets could not harm her because African gods protected her. The truth was simpler and more astonishing. Minerva Hall, now called herself again, reached Savannah 3 days after the massacre. She spent $50 of the stolen money to buy a fake freedom pass from a black barber who quietly ran such a business. The paper stated she was a free woman of color, legally released, traveling to Charleston for work. It would not survive close inspection, but it allowed her to move through Savannah without being seized at once. She located the brothel where patients had been sold. Madame Dubra's house stood near the docks, a 3-story building painted bright red, with music and laughter spilling from open windows even during the day. Minerva watched it for a full day, learning patterns, counting guards, marking exits. That night she slipped in through a kitchen window and moved through the house like a shadow. She found patients in a 3rd-floor room, chained to a bed, barely awake from the laudanum used to keep the girls obedient. Patience was thin. Her eyes were empty, staring at nothing. Patience, Minerva whispered, touching her daughter's face. Baby, it's Ma, I'm here. Slowly Patience focused. Then somehow she smiled. "Mama, are you real? I'm real, and we're going." Manuva picked the lock on the chains, a skill she had learned years earlier from enslaved blacksmith. She wrapped Patience in a stolen coat, gave her shoes, and helped her to the window where a rope waited. They climbed down into the alley, moved through Savannah's dark streets, and by dawn were hidden in the cargo hold of a northbound boat. Helped by a free black sailor who asked nothing, they traveled for 3 months. Always moving, always careful. They went from Charleston to Wilmington, then to Norfolk. In every city, Manuva used stolen money to buy false papers and pay for passage or short shelter. Patience slowly healed, though the pain remained deep. The child she had been carrying was lost to miscarriage just days after arriving at the brothel. In January of 1858, they reached Philadelphia. The city had a strong, free black community and active abolitionists. Manuva connected with the Underground Railroad through a Quaker church. She told her story, not all of it, but enough. Within weeks, both women had new names, work, and a small room in a board house run by free black families. Manuva never trained cats again. She worked as a seamstress, went to church, lived quietly, but she kept the satchel with Blackwood's papers, the newspapers describing the Willamia massacre, and the wanted poster with her name. These were proof that she had fought back, that she had refused to accept weakness, that she had turned nature itself against those who crushed her. Patience later married, had children, and lived to see slavery end in 1865. She named her first daughter Manuva and her second Am, keeping both identities alive. She told her children the true story, not the myth, so they would know their grandmother's strength. Manuva lived to 73, dying peacefully in 1892, 27 years after freedom. She was buried in a black cemetery in Philadelphia under her African name, the one her mother gave her, the name meaning peace. Her stone was simple, Imim. She made peace through justice. Back in Georgia, the legend of the Panther Queen did not fade. The tale passed from enslaved people to freed people to their children. Each telling added something new, some true, some imagined. Some said Manuva returned during the Civil War and fought with Union soldiers, her 6 Wildcats attacking Confederates. Some said she became a speaker for abolition in the North, though never naming herself. Others claimed she freed many slaves using her bond with wild animals. White residents of Burke County tried hard to erase the story. They burned records, threatened witnesses, silenced talk, but they could not undo what had happened. The Willamia massacre remained the boldest act of slave resistance in Georgia's history, a harsh reminder that oppression always carries the seeds of its own end. Modern historians have tried to separate fact from myth. Court records confirm 6 men died at Willamia Plantation on October 22, 1857. Sheriff reports mentee on animal attacks but give no explanation for how wildcats entered the house or were guided. The plantation was sold at auction in 1858 after Elanina Blackwood died under strange conditions, found in her bed with her throat cut. Officials called it a robbery gone wrong, though nothing was taken. Manuva's escape and later life in Philadelphia are confirmed through church records, leases, and census lists. The papers she carried, Blackwood's ownership records, Patience's bill of sale, and newspaper accounts of the massacre were donated to the Smithsonian in 1947 by Patience's granddaughter, making them available to historians as for the cats. Hunters reported strange sightings for years after 1,857 stories described panthers and cougars with no fear of people, hunting together in unusual ways, bearing scars that suggested contact with humans. Whether they were the same 6 cats, different animals, or fear-driven exaggerations, no one knows for sure. What is certain is this: Manuva Hall rejected the role slavery tried to force on her. When the law did not protect her child, when the church blessed her chains, when the state defended her rapist, she created her own justice using knowledge passed down by generations of African women who knew that power is never given, only taken. She proved that even the cruelest system cannot fully cage the human spirit's ability to resist. If you are wrestling with the weight of history, her story stands as a reminder that courage can rise. Even in the darkest places, the morality of what Manuva did is complex, but her actions were decisive and calculated. She killed 6 men with careful brutality, using animals as instruments of revenge, planning for months with unyielding precision, showing no mercy. By any legal standard, she was a murderer. But what is the correct response to a system that openly allows rape, family separation, torture, and murder, when the law itself is unjust? When true justice cannot be reached through official channels, how does resistance take shape? These are questions Americans still wrestle with today. The legacy of slavery did not vanish with emancipation. It persisted through Jim Crow laws, through lynching, through segregation, through mass incarceration, through systemic inequalities that endure in housing, education, employment, and the justice system. The chains have changed form, but the spirit that moved maneuver, the refusal to accept helplessness, the insistence on dignity, the willingness to risk everything for freedom remains urgent and relevant. Maneuver's story was hidden for decades because it was considered too dangerous. It showed enslaved people as clever, strategic, capable of careful planning and precise action. It revealed them using their knowledge against oppressors. It showed them succeeding, even if only for a short time. Stories like hers threatened the entire ideology of white supremacy, which depended on seeing black people as passive, childlike, incapable of sophisticated thought or action. But Minerva existed. Her story is real, and it is one of thousands of acts of resistance that American history books have chosen to ignore. Each time we tell these stories, we challenge the comforting falsehood that slavery was somehow tolerable, that enslaved people accepted their fate, that resistance was rare or pointless. Each time we remember the Panther Queen of Georgia, we honor everyone who refused to be broken. The last chapter of Minerva's story belongs not to her alone, but to those who came after her. Her great-great-grandchildren were part of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. One of her great-great-grandsons is today a civil rights lawyer in Atlanta. The blood of the Panther Queen still flows through living people. They inherited not just her DNA, but her determination to reject injustice. In 2012, a group of black activists and historians placed an unofficial memorial near the site of the old Willow plantation. The plantation itself is gone, replaced by commercial development, but the memorial remains in a small park, a simple stone with a carved panther and the words honoring Minerva Hall and all who resisted. Your courage was not wasted. That memorial has been vandalized 3 times. Each time, community members repaired it, understanding why the story matters. Minerva's act of vengeance, extreme as it was, reveals a fundamental truth about human nature. We are not meant to be owned. We will resist oppression in what? Their ways are available, and sometimes resistance takes the form of violence, because violence is the language oppression recognizes. The story of the Panther Queen reminds us that history is not only what happened to people, but also how people responded to what happened to them. Minerva Hall was not a passive victim of slavery. She was an active agent in her own liberation and the protection of her daughter. She used intelligence, ancestral knowledge, patience beyond measure, and yet ruthless violence to strike at a system designed to strip her of humanity. Was it justice or murder? There is no simple answer, but consider this. In a world where the rape of a 14-year-old girl is legally permitted, where selling pregnant teenagers into brothels is protected by law, where black mothers have no legal rights to their children, what does justice even mean? When every legal avenue is blocked, when the law itself is the oppressor, how should one respond? Minerva answered in the most primal way imaginable. She became predator rather than prey. She armed herself with the wildest creatures of nature and unleashed them on the men who had stolen everything from her. And for one night, on October 22nd, 1857, in Burke County, Georgia, the natural order was reversed. The enslaved became the master, and 6 men felt the helplessness they had inflicted on countless others. That lesson echoed across the South for years. Slaveholders worked hard to erase this story, because if one woman could act like this, what could stop others? If animals obeyed an enslaved woman before they obeyed their masters, what did that imply about the so-called natural hierarchy? The Panther Queen was dangerous not because she killed 6 men, but because of the idea she embodied. Resistance is possible, power can be seized, and no oppression is absolute. Remember Minerva Hall. Remember that she existed. Remember that she fought back. Remember that she won, at least for one night. Remember that her daughter survived. Remember that her descendants live on today. Remember that the spirit that drove her, the insistence on dignity, agency, and freedom, cannot be destroyed no matter how much violence is used to suppress it. This is not an easy story. It was not meant to be comfortable. Comfort does not change the world. Minerva's story should unsettle you, challenge your assumptions about violence, justice, and resistance. It should make you ask yourself what you would do in her position. Would you risk everything? Would you choose life in chains or death fighting for freedom? If this story moves you, share it. Tell others about the Panther Queen. Resist the sanitized versions of American history that erase acts like hers. Demand that schools teach the full truth about slavery, including the cruelty of the system and the resistance it sparked. Support efforts that address the legacy of slavery through education, reparations, and systemic reform. And most importantly, when you see injustice today in policing, in courts, in economics, in any system that treats humans as less than human, do not remain silent. You do not need to train wildcats or wield weapons, but you must resist. You must speak up. You must act in whatever ways your conscience and circumstances allow. The story of Minerva Hall is not just history. It is a mirror reflecting the present, asking what we would risk for justice, what we would sacrifice to protect our loved ones, when we would finally say enough and mean it. These are not simple questions, but they are the questions that matter. Remember the Panther Queen. Remember that she was real. Remember that she struck back. Remember that she survived. Remember that her story lives on in descendants who carry her blood and spirit. Remember that oppression has never permanently defeated the human spirit, and that resistance, even violent resistance, has always been part of the fight for freedom. This is how we honor those who fought before us, by remembering truthfully, telling their stories fully, and continuing their fight in our time. The chains may look different now, but the struggle remains. May we all show even a fraction of Minerva's courage when called to oppose injustice. May we honor the sacrifices of those who came before. The Panther Queen of Georgia lived, she resisted, she struck back, and she won. Her story ends here, but the legacy of resistance she represents continues in every person who refuses to accept oppression, in every voice that speaks truth to power, in every act that defends human dignity against systems built to destroy it. Remember Minerva Hall, tell her story. Never forget that freedom has always been won by those bold enough to fight for it, no matter the cost.